Morning. The Guam Legislature is back in session. We're on Bill 166, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate, of course, the fact that we accepted it and we were discussing it on its placement to the third reading file. And a question was brought up by one of my colleagues, and to be a trooper, I suppose, but also more importantly is to follow the law, is to make sure then that although the committee report has gone out and we've accepted it, we were moving forward, and I feel that it is important for me to make sure then is that since we pass laws, I should follow the law. And that report, Bill 166, has not really complied fully by having the two appraisals. Therefore, I am going to make that motion is to send Bill 166 back to the committee until such time that we are able to secure the two land appraisals for transfer as required by law. That then only then will I then request to send it, to place it on the next agenda or whenever we're going to go into session.
On the motion to send Bill 166 back to committee.
He was just joking.
No objection. The next bill that was set aside was 287. Senator Muñoz, you're recognized.
Speaker Cruz, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to, I guess, try and answer some of the questions that were posed by my colleagues the day before. And I want to share a little bit of the background information that is needed on the properties involved in this case 287-32. Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that 287-32 again is to transfer the Department of Public Health property from Asinan, a portion of the public health property in Asinan, for that of a lot consisting of 10,000 square meters plus and minus in Derido, to build an environmental health lab. And as I say that, I want to reflect back to Public Law 22-18, which sets out the provision of why this bill that we have before us, 287-32, is needed. Public Law 22-18 was an act to reserve government of Guam real property for future use by the three branches of government. Section 75104 of Title 21 of the Guam Code annotated, Mr. Speaker, as amended, specifies that all government of Guam lands, excluding all lands dedicated to a specific public use by law, and all lands reserved in accordance with Section 60105 of Title 21 of the Guam Code annotated as amended, are designated as available lands for the purpose of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. It was noted in that public law, Mr. Speaker, that the Director of Land Management was authorized to compile a list of properties to be reserved after conducting a public hearing, and that public hearing was in May of 1993, May 7th, which was over 21 years ago. And the Director of Land Management compiled that list, and that was transmitted to the 22nd Guam Legislature for approval. In consideration of what lots were to be reserved and for what purpose, the health, safety, and education of the general public were the first and foremost criteria in this public law. At that time, the Legislature's Committee on Housing and Community Development advised all government entities seeking to reserve land that the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, with the assistance of the Legislature, will work with the respective department or agency should the entity need to acquire land after the adoption of the Government of Guam Reserve Land List, contained in what would eventually become Public Law 2218. And of course, I have the law in front of me, Mr. Speaker. And again, the guidelines for governing this land registration is listed, and of course it says for the health, safety, and the education of the general public, and would be the first and foremost criteria in this committee review. The committee is advised that all government entities seeking to reserve land that the Chamorro Land Trust, with the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, with the assistance of the legislature, would work together, like I said earlier, with the respective departments, and should the entity need to acquire the land after the adoption of this reserve land. In that land, in this public law, the public health facility, which is the portion of lot 3470, and the shelter, which was also for a portion of 3470, a residential treatment facility, and also a foster home. Children's foster home were part of that portion that belongs to public health, would be utilized for all these different programs. So lot 3470, containing an area of 117.94 acres, was covered by this public law, and public health was given 8 acres in that lot for the following purposes: 2 acres for a homeless shelter, 2 acres for a children's foster home, and 4 acres for the public health facility. My bill, or this bill that was introduced by myself and Senator Rodriguez, seeks to exchange that property it has in Chalampago for the property in Dedido. It was always contemplated that all the land reserved for public health in Chalampago, all 8 acres, be exchanged for the 2 lots, as noted earlier. I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, that the Dedido lot that was requested by Public Health and worked with Chamorro Land Trust and GURA and Department of Public Health and the agencies involved, that the Dedido and the Municipal Planning Council and the Dedido Mayor's Office and the mayor herself, that land in question for the exchange would be a 10,931 square meter lot next to the existing health facility, which is the public health, Northern Public Health, which is a total of 4,121 square meters for the Tamuning lot for the children's foster home. And Mr. Speaker, you know that those 2 lots in exchange, that was supposed to be exchanged for the Assassinan lot, we had that public hearing, and there were major concerns that came up after that, and that's why that children's foster home facility, that bill is still in your committee until we can figure something out. I want to share with you, Mr. Speaker, that when one of my colleagues, Speaker Wampat, asked about the existing zoning in Dedido and what it is zoned today, we confirmed with the mayor and with Chamorro Land Trust that zoning was zoned at R1. And R1 is a one family dwelling zone, which is under 21 GCA section 61305, which subsection B will allow for the conditional use of the lots for health service office with a laboratory and public facilities. So the proposed use would be conforming. So I want to say that the proposed use that we're requesting for in this bill would be in conformance. The Chalampago property, Mr. Speaker, is presently zoned at A, which is agricultural rural zoned. I want to share with you that Public Health yesterday or the night before, emailed me and reconfirmed their intention to exchange the property in Chalampago for the two smaller lots. Based on the proposal, I do have a following amendment, and I'm trying to look for it right now. Does anybody have a copy of my amendment? Mike, can I borrow? I do want to proffer this. Does everybody have a copy? And on page 2, line 11, I'd like to add on section 2, land exchange authorized notwithstanding any provisions of law, and in consideration of the highest and best use of the properties in question, Magalahinguahan is hereby authorized to exchange the real property reserved for the Department of Public Health and Social Services described as, and put a 4-acre portion of lot number 3470 containing an area of 117.943 acres more or less located in a scene of the municipality of Orta Chalampago as marked by designated on LM check number 161 FY 1993 and the Department of Land Management's document number 486438 dated March 1993, and we did attach a copy, and that's Exhibit A. Also for that property, lot number 1, block 7, track 170, municipality of Dedido, Guam, containing an area of 10,931 square meters, more or less, as marked as designated on Department of Land Management drawing number 14-13T720 and LM check number as 074-FY2013 dated September 2013, and a copy of which is attached as Exhibit B. Mr. Speaker, based on that proposal, I really hope that my colleagues consider this proposal. We did receive money for this capital improvement project, and as each day goes by, I guess having to pay more for construction costs and making sure that building materials and all that continues to rise. I'm just hoping that we finally build an environmental lab. All the stakeholders within the government of Guam have been working on this. When the Department of Chamorro Land Trust worked with their chairman, there were questions regarding the use of this property in Dedido, and they wanted to make sure that they realized that this health facility, this environmental lab, was a necessity and a need, and that we could move forward for this, and that all the stakeholders within the government of Guam approved and are working closely with this. So I ask my colleagues to please reconsider and look this over, and if they have any questions I guess to work with me, and I'll try and answer to the best of my ability. But I'm hoping that they support this effort, especially knowing that we may have some other disease that may be close and nearby, and even if the newspaper says it may not be a threat, I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, why do we have to send our testings to see if there's any kind of disease when we can build it and find the results here instead of sending it off island? Sinamasi.
Thank you. I've noticed 2 hands have gone up. First, Senator Tom Matta, then Speaker Judy Wampat. Any other senator wish to be heard on this?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I certainly am in full support of the idea to build a testing lab that would serve the needs of the public health. I'm certainly supportive of the fact, and I'm happy that Gov Guam Public Health has gotten funds to be able to construct this facility. So I certainly have no qualms about any of those things, about, you know, that if we build this facility, We won't have to send samples off island for testing, and we can do all that here. That's certainly all very worthwhile and noble objectives. The concern that I have is the equity of the land exchange to be made. Now, basically then with under this amendment here, what we're doing is now the original language was that he was going to give 117 acres of property, or 477 square meters, in exchange for 10,000 square meters of property in Dedido. Now that, certainly sounds like a fair enough exchange, 43-to-1 exchange. But then now with the amendment, now it takes that down to 4 acres or 16,000 square meters of property out in Asinan, which I understand is really real rough land that even to use it for gualo, is going to be quite challenging. There's no infrastructure and whatnot. But, and so now then the exchange rate is no longer 43-to-1, it's a little bit over 1, maybe 1.5 to 1. Now, if the author would yield, on line 17, it makes reference to lot number 2, block 7, as the government of Guam real property. And maybe if the author would yield and help me understand, is that government of Guam property actually Chamorro Land Trust property?
Senator, do you yield?
Yes, to my understanding, it is.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the answer.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. So then, I would like to make an amendment then on line 17 to be very clear that what we are exchanging is 2.7 acres of prime property, prime Chamorro Land Trust property for 4 acres of property out in the sticks. Okay? And so my amendment would be on line 17 to read, with the Chamorro Land Trust real property described as, or with the government of Guam, Chamorro Land Trust real property described as. So we're very clear that this is not the, Gulf Guam property that hasn't been allocated to a certain group of stakeholders, but that in fact it's government of Guam property that has been allocated to the Chamorro Land Trust Commission.
Mr.
Senator
Speaker,
Bonds.
thank you. And if I may, based on Public Law 22-18, it specifically says that these land reservations were specifically carved out, and what needed to be done was that Chamorro Land Trust and all the stakeholders were to come together to build all the facilities stated on this, and that if there were changes made in the future, that the legislature and the stakeholders would come back to the legislature to help make this thing work. So the authority was given to us back in Public Law 22-18, and that's where we are at here today. So not because we're giving away.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't ask for the author to yield.
I've
got the floor, thank you. And so I just want then for the record to be very clear that the land that we are exchanging is government of Guam, Chamorro Land Trust property.
On the amendment? There being no objection.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, again, it is very clear that the exchange that's being made is being made on a area for area basis, albeit the fact that 1 acre of property in Dedido is being exchanged for 1 + 1 point something acres in Asinan. And you know, this legislature has always made it so that if there's any land exchanges to be made, that it is to be done on a value for value basis. And that's the only way we can bring equity to this. Again, yesterday I made the example that, you know, 1 acre of property in the heart of Tumon, where it has infrastructure already available, is certainly a lot more valuable than 1 acre of property in the hinterlands, where it does not have the infrastructure available. So very possibly then that 1 acre in Dedido is really probably worth 10 acres in Asinan. I don't know, but we would never know that if we don't have any kind of an appraisal on these properties. And so I have no objection to the amendment that's being made, because it is making more precise what it is that we want, or what it is that is being sought to do. And so I have no problem with that. I'm just stating my objection or my concerns with this exchange. Thank you very much.
And just for clarification for all the members, Senator Barnes, when you read the public law from 22, the 4 acres was set aside for a public health facility, is that correct? And 2 acres were for foster care. And so what this amendment is doing is transferring the 4 acres in the Asinan area. No, 4 acres of the total Asinan area, which was what?
It's 8 acres. Department of Public Health owns 8 acres. The reserved portion is 8 acres, and 4 acres.
Did you read in the public law there the list of facilities that public health was supposed to build?
Yes.
And how much was set aside for the public health facility?
Homeless shelter, 2 acres. Children's foster home, 2 acres. Public health facilities, 4 acres.
So you're transferring what the public law there said was 4 acres for this Dedido lot. Okay. Just wanted to make that clear, that it was from the public law, that the 4 acres was for that specific purpose. Okay. Madam Speaker.
Oh,
Oh.
I just said thank you, but I wasn't finished.
Okay.
I just want to also, you know, I was looking at the Bureau of Budget comments on Bill 287, and it was interesting in that comment that they provided on paragraph 3. They made the statement that construction of the proposed laboratory would occur whether or not the proposed legislation becomes law. So if this land exchange bill doesn't pass for whatever reason, the construction is going to go on. I don't know how to interpret that, whether that means they got an alternative site to build it on, quote, Gov Guam land, or this is just a demonstration of arrogance on the part of Bureau of Budget that with or without your law, we're going to build it up there in Dedido on Chamorro Land Trust property. I'm not sure how to interpret that, but I find it rather bothersome. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Madam Speaker, you're recognized.
On the main motion?
Yes.
Thank you
Well,
very much.
actually, we're on this amendment
Amendment?
that she has.
Oh, then no, so I want to speak on the main motion then.
All right. All right. On the amendment proffered by Senator Tina Munoz Barnes to 287, any other senator wish to speak on the amendment? Yes, with the inclusion of. Oh, hold on, Senator Limtiaco has.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just as a point of clarification, if the author would yield, wouldn't this require some sort of subdivision as opposed to the current language that says a 4-acre portion? How could you build on a portion of a piece of property? how would you obtain title to the land if it wasn't a subdivided portion of that lot?
Mr. Speaker, both properties belong to the government of Guam. Based on Public Law 2218, the portions and the reservations were already provided. And what it needed was for all the stakeholders to come together and work and facilitate that. And after all of that was done, which was already done, come to the legislature and make the official transfers. And that's what's being done right now.
Yeah, that didn't answer the question at all.
Yeah, I imagine they would have to.
They'd have to subdivide it.
Yeah, they'd have to mark it, put the markings down.
So,
The 4-acre portion that's going to be transferred?
it's going to be subdivided as opposed to marked off? It's going to be legally subdivided?
The Chamorro Land Trust, Public Health, and the stakeholders involved will make the necessary MOUs to convert that based on Public Law 2218.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That didn't answer the question either. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other senator wish to speak on the Munya Barnes amendment as amended by Senator Tom Adda to have specific word Chamorro Land Trust? Any other senator? On the amendment, Madam Speaker.
I just thought about it, you're right, on the amendment, because it says, I don't have a copy of it, but if I was listening correctly, is that a portion, of course, of 4 acres, you're right, a 4-acre portion that is going to be transferred. I mean, the problem with this, of course, is that yes, in the public law and in the 22nd Guam Legislature, under the leadership of former Lieutenant Governor Eddie Rages, when they were making the decision about now putting lands in for the Chamorro Land Trust, is to ask the government to decide for the future, you know, how much lands would they need reserved for purposes such as the request now. And those lands, when they carve them out, large portions of them, they may have the entire acreage or size or square meters or what have you, but they have not been subdivided. They have not even really been surveyed to carve them out. And and to say that just because it's government to government, public health, government, Chamorro Land Trust, government, that, you know, let them decide how they're going to, you know, do this later on to carve this out. If I had my say in the matter, I'll just say that that entire acreage that is being reserved for public health, for wanting to have a prime piece of property, that entire square meters actually go back to the Chamorro Land Trust as compensation because of the fact that we're getting properties right now that are really, although yes, you might say, yeah, you can use it for farmlands, but we consider that to be more bad lands than bad lands, not in the sense that there's no land that's bad. It's just how do you use those lands? You know, what do you use them for? And to me, this is just totally unfair to the Chamorro Land Trust, especially the future generations, where we know we're going to have more children than we are going to have land available for them.
So was there an amendment there, or?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you very much for asking. So I would like to make that amendment instead. Oh, wait, you can't. Did we finish with accepted it already? So we can make a new amendment. Yes, and that the entire acreage of that whole area that's there, reserved for public health, that entire property go back to the Chamorro Land Trust, every bit of it, not just whatever 4 acres.
And how do we address the 3 other facilities that were intended to be built?
Then we'll do that when we get there. But right now we're dealing with this one bill. What you're trying to do is to put a bill already that hasn't even been considered. So therefore, I would like the entire piece of property to go to Chamorro Land.
Mr. Speaker, I object.
All right, there's an objection. Anyone wish to speak on the WANPAD amendment? Senator Tom Adda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I was just looking at the attachments, the exhibits on the bill, and there's no exhibit for lot. What was that lot for the Chamorro, for that Asinan property, for lot 3470? It's not attached on here.
Who has copies of Exhibit A and Exhibit B?
There are several, huh? Do you have it in yours? Yeah, actually the exhibits, there are 4 exhibits here, and they are all for Tract 170, for the Dedido property. And I guess that's important because, you know,
We'll take a short recess.
thank you.
The legislature's back in session. Has everybody gotten a copy of the maps that are marked Exhibit A and B now? Okay. Can we resolve the issue of the amendment proffered by Senator Munya Barnes? Did you were going to make an amendment? You made an amendment to transfer the entire lot 3470. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When I made that amendment, little did I know that the issue really is much bigger than I thought. In terms of saying that, I wanted it to just all go back then to the Chamorro Trust, primarily because of the topography of that particular lot number of 3470 in Chalampago, that it was no access to water, power, or anything for that matter. But what I had discovered, of course, in an exhibit of Public Law 2218, that although, yes, there are 3470 is the property we're talking about to do an exchange, and that 117.94 acres were to be then, were a total of not necessarily the 117, but rather 10, 12, 14, 16, 20 acres of that particular lot number are for the Children Residential Treatment Facility of 10, a crisis center of 2, a homeless shelter at 2, children foster home at 2, public health facility at 4, and a senior nursing home at 7. But, oh no, I'm sorry, take that off. That's not part of it, just the public health facility. But even further, it gets more complicated now because we're not talking about public health only now, which this bill is addressing. But in that same acreage that we're talking about, total acreage, there's for a reservation also for a middle school in Chalampago. But then it goes on further that for Guam Memorial Hospital, there's the acute care hospital also for another 35 acres. And then mental health and substance abuse also would have 5 acres. So this has actually become far more convoluted than we originally had discussed. And just the sheer amendment to just take then the entire acreage and send it back, rather transfer it over to Chamorro Land Trust, definitely would not be a big move per se, because it's going to affect all these other areas. But I think the bottom line here is that when you really consider the area, and as one of my colleagues had asked, is that have this particular total acres of 117 actually been subdivided, so we can know where then really any one of these competing interests within the government will get. And we can't just say, okay, I want the middle school to be right in the middle of that property, or maybe somebody might say, well, we'll carve out the corner of this and then we'll give it to DOE. We can't do that. And this is the kind of problem that we're seeing right now, even in families when they're dividing their properties, everybody competing for,
Mr. Speaker,
where
can I
they
do a
want
point
their
of
acreage.
information, please, based on her conversation? I need to do a point of information because the acreage that she's talking about and how convoluted she says it's getting doesn't talk about lot number 3470. I want to share with you that the school and those things that she's talking about, the only reservation for the total acreage for 117.94 acres are for the children's residential treatment, the crisis center, the homeless shelter, the children's foster care, and the public health facility comes out of lot number 3470. The senior nursing home, the satellite office, and all that come from different properties in Dedido, Agate, and Iran, and Umatic.
No.
So I'm just
No.
going to bring it up as a point of
No.
Mr.
information.
Speaker, the point of information actually is wrong because I'm looking at Public Law 22-18, Exhibit to Section 2B, Middle School, Chalampago, lot number 3470, total acreage 117.94, committee reservation 35. Guam
Yes,
Memorial
Madam
Hospital,
Speaker.
acute, the same thing, all from 3470.
Yes, ma'am, which is
Thank
the
you.
reason why
So
the
therefore-
amendment proffered by Senator Munya Barnes only says
All
4
right.
acres of
And-
that property.
And my argument here, and I know you and I are not supposed to argue this, is that, as the speaker, of course, is that allow me then now to continue on, is that although, yes, we're talking about 4 acres of this property, but the fact of the matter remains is that it hasn't been subdivided for any one of these agencies, and just because they're government, oh, we can just go ahead and let it go. And as I was saying earlier, even with families who have large acres of property that want to give them out to their children, and should their parents die, then what, they're all going to fight as to where then is probably the most valuable of the property, or the topography is just going to be perfect for me to go in there and build my house, you know? I mean, come on. Just because we're government doesn't mean we're going to do this, you know? It's no wonder that, you know, the government gets criticized all the time when we require certain things of them. So just to make this, you know, short and quick, to withdraw that amendment of mine to just transfer the full 117.94 acres, the entire thing back to Chamorro land, I withdraw with another amendment.
Well,
Or you
let's,
wanna-
let's deal with your amendment, your withdrawal. Thank you. A motion to withdraw the amendment. Any objection?
So my amendment here, Mr. Speaker, is that, like I said earlier, is that this whole area hasn't even been subdivided. We don't know who's going to get what. We don't know where Guam Memorial Hospital will want to put their acute care hospital. We don't know where mental health will want to put their adult residential treatment. We don't know where we're going to put the middle school in Chalampago. And we don't know where we're going to put all these residential facility, crisis center. We can't do this like patintiao. That's what we're trying to do here, and it's not going to work that way. So my motion is then, I feel because of all these problems right now, and more importantly, because we're not even following the law, to be able to provide 2 appraisals of any transfer of any property regardless, and this in this case is government property, then my motion is to send it back to the committee.
There's been a motion to
I
send it back.
object.
There's an objection. Who wishes to speak on the motion to? If not, there's been a motion to send it back. Those in favor of sending the bill 287 back to committee, please raise your right hand. One, two, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. $362. Senator Siniclas.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to the discussion on 362, a request was made for the fiscal note or a waiver thereof, and that has already been circulated to all the members, so we are now still on the main motion, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. On Bill 362-32, any senator wish to be heard on the bill, on the main motion? Senator Limtiaco.
Mr. Speaker, could I just get a real brief recess? I just need to gather my notes. I do have an amendment to proffer, but if any other senator would like to speak on the main motion, I'd waive that my time.
All right. Any other senator wish to be heard? We'll take a short recess while. We're back on. While everybody's trying to get themselves back on 362, we'll move on to 393. Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker? 393.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's several things I know that I like to clarify, if I may, before I proceed then with other amendments, primarily because in the middle of our discussion, we had received not just a letter from Gita, but then what was made available to us was also the testimony that came also from BBMR. And so because of these two comments, it kind of threw things out of the loop here as well. So I think it's important to address even what was being said and how contradictory even in the same messages that these comments were, and then also to give a chronological order of events and why maybe, possibly, because I know they kind of all happened within months, that it could have been missed somehow with Gita and BBMR. And I can understand, of course, with BBMR, with with them having a new administrator. So several things that I, if I may just take some time to do that. One of our colleagues had read actually a line, a sentence from the comments on the bill that was attached to the fiscal note. And I'm only going to read exactly what's there just to show you the conflict. When it says here that the line of credit on page 1 of that comment from BBMR, the line of credit, which is the third paragraph and the last sentence, a revolving loan fund or a direct loan may be secured by the unpledged portion of the business privilege tax so as not to violate the government's covenant bondholders of Series 2011A, 2012B, and 2013C. And those are the ones that I also mentioned on the bill because those have been reserved. There's 3% of that from the BBT. Then when you go down further on the fourth paragraph, and then they're saying here, Bill number 393-32 identifies a non-viable fund source of repayment of the proposed line of credit, revolving loan fund, and or direct loan. And that was what my colleague had read. But what this person who wrote this didn't know that there were other things that had happened since that time when Public Law 31-229 was signed into law, changing all that so that now that becomes an unpledged portion from 229. And then when you look on page, the last page, page 4 of that same fiscal note, again, the last paragraph of the second paragraph says that GMH needs Bill 393 to be amended to appropriate $7 million rather than the proposed $4 million from the viable, unpledged reserve source to provide sufficient funding. So, just within this, there's two statements that says that it is viable, but one that says that it's not. But if they read further the series that in which the other 3% were pledged, that would not then affect it, because the last one was actually amended in our budget bill to be able to free up that 1% of that particular fund. So that's the BBMR. Now, to go to Gita's letter that they had submitted, and I'll take them in the order, of course, and I know, and I heard Ms. Tyron's comment this morning that she said when they opened it up, it says the Guam Economic Development Authority is in favor, of course, to the intent. So, of course, we can all be in favor of the intent, because the intent does not have the force of law of the bill, but they oppose the funding source, and for 3 reasons, and I'd like to go through those 3 reasons. One, they said they're not aware, of course, or seen any technical designs and price quotes. And that I know is going to be addressed, because one of my colleagues have told me that that's an amendment that he wants to propose, that before any monies that can be, even before they go out and borrow or draw down these monies, that we want to make sure that the A&E, of course, will be in place so that the loan would not kick in until we do have that. So that can be addressed in an amendment that Senator Mike San Nicolas is going to provide. Number 2, they said the hospital management, of course, has had insufficient funding for its operations. But as you know, this funding is not for operations at all. It's for CIP. And never would I be in favor of borrowing for operations, because that means the money is gone in a day. But when you borrow for CIP, you can see that project for 30 years. And that's the difference. So this is not for operations of the hospital. So that part then needs to be corrected. Third, it says that the amount once professionally defined should be a companion amount to the cash provided to the hospital from 32-179, which provided, but they're not, they're separate. Third, Public Law 32-179, where we appropriated almost $900,000, that was going to be seed money to try to get them started, preferably, and in the public hearing that Senator Rodriguez had, I had asked that question. What are they using the $895,000? And they said it was going to be for the A&E. So then that means now we're going to have to borrow the rest then, the remaining of that $5 million, which was in the original bill, is in the original bill, $4 million. So therefore, this definitely will take care of that after the A&E is done. So now the only thing, of course, that really concerns me now at the very end, and she also mentioned it, that although the bill is laudable, they support authorizing the governor to identify funds for this purpose. Mr. Speaker, you know that the practice of this legislature and past legislatures, I suppose, or whenever, and hopefully we would never find ourselves down that road, is that we've always said, is that if we don't want to end up with more unfunded liabilities or unfunded mandates, is that we need to always identify a source. Because if we don't identify a source and we just leave it to, quote unquote, the general fund, or leave it, quote unquote, to let somebody else decide what it is, this is going to be an unfunded mandate. Because then what it is that when we budget, of course, we want to budget whatever we bring in. And when you start to then take what was already appropriated, that means you're going to have to take it from the other departments and agencies, therefore causing a shortfall. But when you identify a funding source that is considered to be viable, and I say viable because I'm going to read to you a letter, also a testimony from GITA, but this was on March 27, 2012, for exactly the same thing in which we were going to build our schools using the BBT. And this is, and I'm going to read a quote from them. The present condition of certain Guam public schools, of course, is deplorable, which creates an unconducive environment which hinders on the production of work and teachers. We then presented, this is from GITA, a lease-back financing approach which would entail reserving a portion of the business privilege tax as the pledge security. Using the BBT would allow the government of Guam to take advantage of tax-exempt financing and will help keep the cost of borrowing as low as possible. Additionally, GITA has looked into the option of issuing bonds in accordance with GITA's Project Revenue Bond Act as contained in Title 12, Chapter 64 of the Guam Code annotated as another option to fund facility repair and renovation. So we're talking about funding a facility repair and renovation. So therefore, it says, as a point of information, BBT-backed bonds would be federal tax exempt, and the GITA project revenue bonds would be triple tax exempt. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, I realize that there are two different dates from two different from the same agencies, but I like to always give the benefit of the doubt, of course, or whomever it is, maybe who's writing this and may not have caught up with what is in the budget law right now, which went into effect yesterday. And when that did, what it did is that it released in that budget bill an amendment that I put in, which was from a public law that was heard, and a letter in which I've submitted to the governor explaining to him why, the purpose of introducing that bill and what it would do. And somehow, of course, I guess maybe that little section of the budget bill didn't make it to BBMR or DOA or GITA. But what that had done is that it had actually released then that 1%, which is exactly what we're using now for the hospital to do the financing renovation of this facility, which they, in their statement, said that is a very good option to do because it's a good source, a viable source, a strong source, and at the same time, it would definitely, to the government's advantage, that it be a federal tax exempt, and in our case in particular, a triple tax exempt, and getting, of course, lower interest. So I just wanted to explain that for everyone so they can understand, because I know there are these two documents that copies were made for everyone to be able to see, and it raised, of course, some doubts maybe in your minds whether this is something that really is viable, and it is. I'm saying it is only based, again, on what we did by law, what we did as a body by law, and the fact that there was a bill heard and was supported, and then, of course, this letter of support for that particular funding source is identified. So now they've done that and gotten that out of the way, to proceed then with, I know where we left off yesterday was the amendment, the second amendment, which then was to not to exceed then from, and then to line 3, the $4 to $7 million. That's the amendment where we left off before a lot of other questions were coming up with.
On 393, I'm sorry, when we switched dates, I lost the speaking order. Who wishes to speak on the amendment from 4 to 7? That is the amendment on the floor, is that correct? From 4 to 7. Senator, 4 million to 7 million. Senator Snickles, Senator Tom Adda, Senator Chris Duenas. Senator Snickles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd first like to start out by saying that no matter what, under any circumstances, I'm committed to giving birth to this baby. Even if we got to call Dr. Kim in here and get everybody an epidural, I'm going to ask him to do so we can all push to give birth to this baby. I think what we're going to see throughout the course of the discussion on Bill 393 is a bunch of individual senators proposing their own changes in order for us to be able to get comfortable with moving this forward. I initially had issues of going from 4 to 7 because I believe that in consultation with some of the professionals that 4 million was sufficient for the first phase. However, if the Speaker's amendment to go from 4 to 7, it is in line with what was passed by the board, and I do have a subsequent amendment that I will be proffering if this amendment does pass that will allow me to be comfortable with the full 7 million as it will segregate out the two amounts and only roll forward the borrowing based on the readiness of the facility to move the project forward. So at this time, with the caveat that my amendment will pass in the future at a later time, I do rise in support of raising it to 7 million.
Thank you very much, Senator Snickles. Senator Tom Adda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise in support of increasing the amount from $4 million to $7 million. But of course, I did express yesterday the concern that I have about how this thing has, as each day passes, the price ticket just keeps escalating. It started out with 2 million, now we're up to 7, and I think somebody was even entertaining possibly 12 million. So I think to allay my concerns about just where are we going with this thing, and is in fact, what is the amount that I think to put it into better perspective, we can accomplish that by actually requiring that a master plan be made or an update to, if they have an existing master plan, then to update that. And so along then, I don't know if it's appropriate at this point, but I guess an amendment to the amendment, because the amendment is to increase it from 4 million to 7 million. And so my amendment to that amendment is that to add a new subparagraph at the end of the bill on page 3, to add a new subparagraph W10. And that amendment has been circulated. So I'm going to need your guidance as to whether it's appropriate to make that amendment at this point.
Let's hold off on that. Let's just get the 7, whether or not we all agree on the 7 first, and then Senator Snickles has an amendment, and you can have an amendment. I'll come back to you.
Okay,
I
fine.
promise. Senator Chris Duenas, on the amendment from 4 to 7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in support of that amendment. And I think just to go over Madam Speaker's comments as well, I think it's important to put it into perspective once again and take what's currently on the record. I heard my good friend, our colleague, Senator Mana Tyrone on the radio today, stating that they are and their position will remain in full support of the effort moving forward to ensure that the labor and delivery room gets what they need in order to accomplish this mission. Yesterday, many of us stood up here, and this is a preface to supporting this, because many of us stood up to express concerns not about what's being done here and the need. We all spoke, I think, eloquently on understanding the need, but on the process here and ensuring that obviously now as this is moving forward in phases, that truly the due diligence is being done in the planning stages and everything else. And I think that's some of the things that were pointed out in the Gita letter, not to tread that ground over completely. But I also think it's important because everything we're doing right now, Mr. Speaker, obviously is getting a lot of media attention for obvious reasons. But it was our good colleague, Senator Yamashita, who went forward on our side of the aisle and during the budget period really carved this out and identified this. And then she worked with Madam Speaker to ensure that, those monies were put together and there was an agreement on it. And then there was a bill that was produced. And so I'm not going to name names or anything else, but just in prefacing my support for this objective of meeting what looks like halfway of how the numbers went from the 4.8 million, I believe it was, and then even yourself, Mr. Speaker, expressing, wow, this thing's going up, 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 and without any correspondence of what all that means. So I think this is a good middle ground. And I also think, Mr. Speaker, for all those in our community, to include our medical community and our hospital folks, to understand clearly, we are dedicated and committed to this process. But it does nobody any good to single out either a partisan statement about what senators on what side of the aisle support what and are doing what on the floor, other than doing the people's work here, Mr. Speaker. And that is to ensure that we're providing the due diligence, providing the funding according to the planning and capability of moving forward. And even as our good colleague proffering this amendment has stated, that we don't overburden in terms of borrowing and having debt service on monies when we're not even fully prepared to go through the entire spectrum of what the project would call for, because none of us, as our good friend from Manila was stating, colleague from Manila has stated, none of us have seen an A&E plan. And so I think this is very prudent. I think it's smart. But I also call for decorum and respect in that area of really processing this in a manner that's appropriate and fitting. And I believe at the end of the day, I would be surprised if when this bill is done, it doesn't have a 14-0 vote. And so thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly rise in full support of this amendment.
Thank you very much. Any other senator on the amendment to 7? Senator Rodriguez.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise also in support of the amendment to increase the borrowing amount from 4 to 7. I'll support it even if it goes to 12 or even the 40 million if we need to for everything at the hospital. But what unsettles me is that up to this point, we're still seeing here that that we are expanding the borrowing authority of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. We all know here that if we're going to leave it up to our hospital, they can't afford it. They won't be able to afford it. And so that's why we have measures like this that look at funding sources outside of the hospital coffers. And so I think, before even moving forward with increasing this to 7 million today and maybe even more later, I really think the most prudent thing for us to do here is to move to delete any mention of the authority of Guam Memorial Hospital being the one to negotiate this loan or being authorized to go out and seek a loan, a line of credit. And so please guide me in this, if this would be the proper time to do it, I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment that we strike the mention of the hospital as being the authority that seeks this loan and negotiates this loan.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. Senator Yamashita on the Rodriguez amendment. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, well, I think I do understand what the author of the amendment is trying to do, which is to protect the authority to make sure it doesn't fall on their table to repay or to be responsible for. I think one of the unintended consequences of removing the term authority throughout the measure would be to remove them from the table. And I think we want to make sure that they are always at the table. They need to be driving this project, this initiative. I think that since we have Magalahan Guahan throughout the bill and the authority, I think that together that would serve the best interest. And I'm not suggesting that the government would push the authority to the side, but I do want to make sure that the doctors and the medical staff are actually driving this project. So I object to that amendment.
There's an objection to the amendment, and Senator Frank Uggan on the Rodriguez amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, when the Chair of Health obviously brings this up, he brings up a very legitimate issue in regards to the ability of the authority to be able to assume any additional debt obligation. Not too long ago, as a matter of fact, last year, we had discussed extensively and debated about giving GMH the authority to go out and borrow $25 million and to refinance their existing loan obligation. Even at that time, it was difficult to get that additional assurance. The chief executive had to step in and commit some of the compact impact funds to be able to address that anticipated loan obligation. So the Chair of Health certainly has a very valid reason in terms of moving for that amendment. But I raised a similar concern as the previous speaker, because you remove GMH officials from this particular obligation, they no longer have ownership. They'll take the $7 million, if it's adjusted upward to $12 million, they have no ownership of this loan obligation. And let me say this, in the last 15, 16 years, Mr. Speaker, this body has continued to repeatedly, every single year, when GMH has stepped forward and requested additional funding so that they can take care of obligations, so they can take care of some capital improvement projects, so they can improve the emergency room, so they can expand the ICU facility, this body always came and responded to providing that additional support. And let me go a little further, because I mentioned the $25 million last year. But my second term, I remember distinctly this body, under the leadership of then Senator Lou Leon Guerrero, authorized GMH at that time to borrow $27 million. So, Mr. Speaker, the buck stops here and at the Chief Executive's office. We will not let our public hospital go under in regards to meeting its obligations, but they have to still take ownership of this loan. And this is a commitment, an authorization by this body, that we're going to authorize you to go out and borrow money, and in the same token, take ownership, this body, the legislature, in terms of making sure that we work collectively in the future so that you can continue to meet that obligation. Chief Executive signs this bill, guess what? The governor's office takes ownership of making sure that should there be any potential of default, of non-payment of this obligation, that we will step in and ultimately provide that support. But the Board of Trustees and the administrator of GMH has to, Mr. Speaker, in light of it anticipating receipt of up to $7 million, they need to continue to take ownership of this obligation so that, in fact, it's a collective government of Guam issue. It is an issue that this legislature and the chief executive officer, regardless as to who's been sitting there over the course of the last 15, 16 years, has always stepped forward and provided that support. And that has been our commitment, not only to the hospital, but most importantly to our people who have to use that facility every single day. And I stand with that commitment, and I raise some serious concerns about extracting GMH from any loan obligations that this would provide. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. On the Rodriguez amendment, the Rodriguez amendment is to remove Guam Memorial Hospital Authority as the obligor. And there's been an objection by Senator Yamashita. Do you wish to close, Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to our colleagues who have participated in this discussion. But just to make it very clear, the intent, of course, is not to take away the hospital in the process of determining how this money is used. I think it's very clear. You look at line 9 on the first page. The line of credit, a revolving loan fund, and or direct loan shall be used by the authority for the renovation of the Guam Memorial Hospital Labor and Delivery Ward. And then if you look ahead a little bit at one of the amendments that will be proffered later on by our good colleague from Mangilaw, and if that is successful in moving forward, it states that the hospital shall develop this master plan, and this master plan will be what is used to guide how the proceeds will be used for the hospital. And so my only concern here is that you have the hospital, as it is written now, you have the hospital as being the obligor of this loan, which the intention from the main mover of the bill is saying that's not the intent. The intent is for the government to go out, seek the money for the sole purpose of this renovations at the hospital. And so, I hope that I'm able to just make it clear in my amendment to the amendment that it is not to remove the hospital and its and the doctors and nurses who we all want to be part of this renovation. It's just referencing them as the obligor. I think we should make it perfectly clear that that is not the intent of this measure, and I believe the speaker, that is not her intent as well. So I ask my colleagues again to please support this amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Rodriguez amendment was to remove Guam Memorial Hospital listed as the obligor of the loan, and there's been an objection by Senator Yamashita. Those in favor...
Yeah,
Please.
just to get maybe, because even though you take it out on the title only, but the content on line 5 is said there that shall be negotiated by the authority. So that means they're not taken out at all. They're still there, working with, of course, the governor. Because what it is really, when you look at it, hospitals or departments and agencies really can't go out and borrow independent of the government, because this is not money that is coming from the hospital. It's from the government that has to be committed by GIDA and the governor when they sign off on the AG, not the hospital. So really, the hospital is still going to be a part of that negotiation. It's just, like I said, only on the title. I guess I should have asked to speak in favor of the amendment.
I don't think so. No. Let's take a short recess. Session. Senator Rodriguez, did you wish to?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the amendment, my amendment to the amendment still stands, and I spoke to our good colleagues to try to see if we can work it out. But really, it's just to restate that we're just removing the hospital as an obligor, as a party to seeking the actual funds. And so if we can allow legal counsel to be able to look at the entire the piece of legislation and make those amendments, removing any mention of the hospital being an obligor or being a party to seeking the funds. But everything else, especially of course line 9, where it's specific that the money that they're seeking is for the hospital's renovation, that those things all stay there.
That's what he was saying.
My question is, what about in this part right here, and the alternative financing? Do you also want to
On page 3, legal counsel has asked if I could ask if in the alternative financing, the authority is still listed there, Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. Was that your intent to leave them there?
No, it's to throughout the legislation to remove the authority, and in this case, it is the Imagalan Guahan, and the authority to remove the authority, and just be the governor, the government of Guam, who is authorized to seek alternative financing.
Okay.
Point of information, Mr. Speaker, with respect to that particular section on the municipal lease financing, I would reckon that the municipal lease financing would require the authority to actually be identified specifically to be the recipient of the municipal lease funds, similar to how we have municipal lease financing for schools, and certain schools are the ones that are funded. So I think that on page 3, line 13, subsection 9, the authority should remain in that particular section, not only as the recipient of municipal lease funds that will be appropriated in future budgets, but also in the event that we do pursue any federal guaranteed loan, the guaranteed loan would still require a beneficiary, and so it wouldn't just be a federally guaranteed loan just to the general fund. It would need to be a federally guaranteed loan to the authority. So I think the authority should remain in that particular instance as a point of information, Mr. Speaker.
And Mr. Speaker, and so again, just to reiterate, I think we're all in agreement that any financing, whether it be through the municipal lease financing, whether it be through the pledging of BPT, that the purpose is always going to be the authority, always going to be for the renovation of the maternity ward. And so, again, just, we can get legal counsel to be able to make those amendments. I think it satisfies what the intent is of the amendment.
Do all the members feel comfortable about leaving that with legal counsel at this point, or should we, why don't, how about if we take a lunch recess and you work this out and we'll come back at 1:30? All right, then I guess Senator Respicio?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would it be more clear if on the title we say to expand the borrowing authority of the government of Guam for the so you delete Guam Memorial Hospital, and then on line 5, you lead the negotiations of the loan agreement between the Guam Economic Development Authority and the governor of Guam. So
That would probably, would that satisfy your concerns, Senator Rodriguez?
Yes, it will. And so that's what we're trying to get at, is that it's the government. And then, just throughout, because even on page 2, on the top, you have that the negotiations between the authority or designee as authorized, so that has to be removed. It's just the government of Guam.
All right, to make it absolutely clear that the borrowing would be done by GIDA and the governor for the purpose of the hospital labor and delivery room. And that's the intent, and we'll work with that with legal counsel. I just spoke to her. She has
And then-
some clear ideas
And
on
then
how that could be
change Guam Memorial Hospital in the title to Government of Guam. So it's the borrowing authority of the Government of Guam.
correct. But you're going to need to withdraw your amendment. Yes.
Okay, well, we'll withdraw
All
it.
right, so
just as that.
your amendment for the removing the authority is going to be withdrawn, and the amendments that were proposed by Senator Respicia will be the amendments that will be adopted. Is that correct? Anybody object to that? Yes. Well, a combination of both the Respicio amendment and your suggestions that you have on the other lines. Okay? Thank you. On the main motion, do I understand you have an amendment, Senator Yamashita? Oh, we're still on the 7 million. Any objection to the 7 million amendment? Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment to proffer, and it has been passed out. And what this amendment does is, while we're talking about allowing or authorizing the government of Guam to borrow monies for the renovation of labor, delivery, recovery, postpartum, the author of this bill had also included alternative financing. You'll find that on page 3. And so what she was doing, I believe, was really providing all these options, so that we're not saying to the government of Guam that you do have to borrow, but she's also saying that there's other opportunities that might occur, whether it's federal guaranteed loan or community facilities loan and grants, as found on line 15, or municipal lease financing, found on page 18. What I would like to do is proffer an amendment that also states that if the governor finds some monies that he can transfer for this particular purpose, then he has the authority to do that. And so the amendment that I have is to add on page 3 to line 20, that Imagalahan Guahan is authorized to identify a fund source and utilize such source for the purposes of renovating the labor, delivery, recovery, postpartum floor where our babies are born, and that the governor shall notify the legislature of the fund sources identified pursuant to this provision no later than 10 working days after the identification of funds. And so for me, though, the options are wide open, and sometimes we never know. Sometimes there are extra monies that are found. Just like the other day, we found out there may have been a pocket of money that hadn't been appropriated before, and that is now going to go to GPD to help out with their maintenance of their cars. So this just leaves it wide open. So I bring this to the floor for deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Yamashita. On the Yamashita amendment, Senator Rodriguez, any other senator after Senator Rodriguez on the Yamashita amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in full support of Senator Yamashita's amendment. Then we're giving the flexibility again to the governor to be able to identify alternative funding sources. However, I think I just in line with what we discussed earlier, I'd like to proffer an amendment to the amendment. It would be Imagalan Guahan is authorized to identify a fund source, and then after that, I'd like to add except for funds that have already, except for funds, fund sources that have already been identified or earmarked for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. So the rationale behind that is that there may be other funds out there that are created and have sources of revenue, but then we want to ensure that those funds are not tapped, again for and diverted into this purpose. Yeah, but if, and earmarked for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority.
No objection? On the Yamashita amendment, Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too rise in support of this amendment. I just want to kind of tighten it up a little bit because there is an implied open end here. After the new amendment that was added where it says identified and earmarked for the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, I'd like to put a comma there and add limited to the amounts in this act. So we'll read, Imagalakan Guahan is authorized to identify a funding source except for fund sources already identified and earmarked for GMHA, limited to the amounts in this act, and utilize such source for the purpose of renovating the labor, delivery, etc. That way, because the way this particular section is written is that technically you can find sources on a continuous and ongoing basis and just keep spending it on renovations above and beyond what's already been the limited amount in the bill.
On the St. Nicholas amendment? Any senator wish to be heard on the St. Nicholas amendment? Any objection to the St. Nicholas amendment? On the Yamashita amendment as amended by Senator Rodriguez and Senator St. Nicholas. Any senator wish to speak on that amended amendment? Any objection to the Yamashita amendment as amended by, further amended by Senator Rodriguez and Senator St. Nicholas? All right, then there's two amendments that are still outstanding, one by Senator St. Nicholas and one by Senator Addis. Senator St. Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to propose an amendment that would go on between lines 11 and 12 on page 1. It has been circulated to members of the body. That would include language that reads, such line of credit shall not be authorized, nor shall any borrowing be initiated that incurs interest expenses until the architectural and engineering specifications are completed and approved by the board of the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, and the request for proposal or invitation for bid to commence renovation is pending funding as follows. 1, $4 million to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority Labor and Delivery Ward renovations, and 2, $3 million to the GMHA nursery renovations. Basically, the way this language is structured, Mr. Speaker, is that the money, we won't go out and borrow the money until the A&Es are complete for both of those items, and we won't. We will also not borrow the money until we're ready, until the RFP or the IFB is ready to get prepared and it needs a funding source. So, what this does is we already pre-authorized $7 million. Once the A&D is complete for labor and delivery, it's approved by the board, and they're ready to go out and bid for it, but they just need a funding source. They can now go out and borrow the $4 million. As soon as the A&D and the RFP and IFB are ready for the nursery, they can then go out and borrow the subsequent 3. But this will prevent us from going out and borrowing the full 7, and then only using the 4 for phase 2, and then just sitting on the $3 million for phase 3, and that all racking up interest expenses. This kind of stages out the borrowing so that it's only borrowed when we're actually ready to move the projects forward.
On the St. Nicholas amendment, Senator Yamashita. Anyone after? Senator Tom Atta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the St. Nicholas amendment. What I would like to offer is that on the double I, the $3 million to the GMHA, what it says nursery renovations, I proffer an amendment that rather than nursery, it's actually recovery, postpartum. Those are the technical terms or the names of that particular unit where the babies and their moms and their dads are then moved to that side of the wing where they quote unquote recover. from the labor and the delivery, and where the babies, hopefully once the renovation takes place, the babies will no longer be separated from their moms and their dads. But at this point they are. And the postpartum is where they are prepared to leave home. So nursery at GMH today is actually referred to as recovery and postpartum. It's a technical amendment.
On the Yamashita amendment to the St. Nicholas amendment.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it, of course, because, and that was something I was going to bring up, but there is, all these are in conflict. And I was going to make an amendment to actually change it. This is what they sent us, but we have to confirm. They told us that it's not just labor and delivery. Then they want us to put maternity, obstetric wards, and then the last one is the nursery intensive care unit. So, I mean, I don't mind the other word, because we do know that after, when you go to the labor, then you deliver, then there's the recovery, and then there's the postpartum. But these are what they gave us at the hospital. So I would prefer that we stick with, what Senator Arlene Yamashita had proffered, but we want to call again to verify at the hospital, because this is the names that they gave us. And I just want to make sure that we're not all stepping over each other on the names of
The board
area.
resolution, doesn't that have that in there?
I'll look.
No, neonatal is not. Yes. No, because they did, when they came and testified, they've changed the word.
So if that is the case, then that means throughout then the bill where it speaks to it, like on page 1, line 10, where it says Guam Memorial Hospital labor and delivery ward, that maybe if we're going to use that maternal care health.
Yes. I mean, that was what they testified to. So on the amendment to change labor and delivery to maternal care, I'll let you, Mr. Chairman, to...
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't necessarily oppose this, the main amendment, right? The main Senator St. Nicholas amendment. However, I think if the Speaker's amendment is moved forward and that it is indicated on page 1, starts on line 10, that the purpose of this financing is for the labor delivery, maternal care, so-and-so, then I think, it's clear that that's the purpose of this. And so my only concern with this amendment that now, we're getting into the picture now saying, okay, $4 million only for this, $3 million for this. I think it's going to be based on what the A&E, assessment is. And so I think we should just, really, if possible, leave it up to them. If it's $7 million, here's $7 million, and the intent is for the labor delivery, maternal care, so-and-so. And not for us here to say, okay, you know what, we want the light fixture here, we want it done this way. That's just, I'm just trying to drive what I'm trying to say home. But so if my colleagues would accept that, then maybe we really don't need this amendment.
Okay. Senator St. Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The intent of the amendment is not in any way, shape, or form to tell the hospital how to go about their renovations. The only thing that the amendment is intending to do is to create a schedule by which the funds will be made available when the projects are ready to move forward. For us to borrow $7 million for a project that's going to be rolling forward in 4 phases means that the initial phase, which we've already funded, is already covered. Phase 2, again, as we're all familiar with, needs $4 million. Now, as was stated in previous days during this session, the hospital cannot shut down the entire labor, delivery, maternity, baby bringing into the world section of the hospital. They need to keep certain areas running in order for them to be able to continue to operate. And so they're not going to be able to move forward the entire renovation in one fell swoop, which means that they're not going to need all the funds at once. Now, we do want to provide them with the authorization to go out and get as much money as they need for phase 2 and phase 3. But what we don't want to do is have phase 2 and phase 3 borrowed for right now and only being able to use the phase 2 monies while we're still paying interest on the phase 3 portion as well. If we're going to be incurring any interest expenses, I want it to be used on capital that's already ready to deploy. For us to be incurring interest expenses on capital that's sitting in the bank waiting for phase 2 to finish, and it's going to take, 18 months, that's 18 months of interest expenses on $3 million that we're incurring, instead of us prudently breaking it up and saying, you have $7 million, we've already authorized it, you can take out the first 4 when you're ready to use it, and you can take out the next 3 when you're ready to use it. That's all we're doing. We're just setting up a schedule by which the funds will be received and the interest expenses will begin incurring, but we're not in any way telling the hospital where to put what fixture or how high to make the ceiling. That's their business, and I agree with the retiring speaker on that. But our business is to make sure that we're making money available in the most prudent fashion and at the least cost to the people of Guam. And so the intent of this amendment, and the reason why I withdrew my initial objection to raising it from $4 million to $7 million, is that we can create a structured way for the funds to be released so that it's costing the people of Guam as little as possible in the way of interest expenses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I had 2 other senators. Senator Etta, did you wish to speak on this? If not, I see Senator Morrison's hand has gone up also on this amendment. Hold on, let's get to Senator Etta was first and then Senator Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise in support of the bill, but I just wonder, from technically on that line I there, where $4 million pending funds as follows: $4 million to GMH, and I would suggest I would move that we insert the language before $4 million up to $4 million, because then if when the bid gets put out and maybe they're hungry enough out there that it can be done for $3 million, then you don't have to spend $4 million. And similarly, double I to insert before at the very beginning there, up to $3 million.
All right. On the Atta amendment, up to. Tony Atta, you have on that amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I fully support the amendment, but I was just wondering whether, because I know there was an amendment earlier to increase it to $7 million. So do we also change that language on the earlier amendment up to $7 million? Since we're putting up to $4 million, up to $3 million, or not to exceed? That's what we, okay.
Okay, on the Atta amendment, any objection? I've just been corrected by the clerks that I've not finished the amendment on what the name of this facility is going to be.
This might help to resolve it. Senator Aline, I know, and Senator Shanicholas, and then myself, we all have different names for this, but maybe because, we're not, of course, the experts in terms of what really is going on in the hospital, but I think the intent here is that maybe what we can say, because we've always heard that phase 1 will be the A&E. So maybe rather than just saying that up to $4 million to GMH for phase 2 renovations, and then up to $3 million for phase 3, of renovations again. Yeah, because then, like Senator Tony Adat mentioned, is that sometimes in negotiation you might be able to get really more for your buck. And Mr. Berger did say that when they were doing the urgent care room facility, is that they were able in their negotiations to bring the amount down, so that then the extra savings, they're actually able to go out and get furnishings. And that also can happen here. So rather than just stifle them, and I hope my colleagues would agree then, is just make it for the first one up to $4 million to GMH for phase 2, up to $3 million to GMHA for phase 3. And then that gives them the full, the leverage and the gamut to decide exactly what, would be, what they're able to do with the amount of money they have.
For safety reasons, I think we really should at least use the name that they're using, maternal care, because in the July 25th testimony of the administrator of the hospital,
Okay,
he
so
was more
phase-
concerned about doing an obstetrics and a hip transplant section, and I don't think he wanted to leave it open.
You're right. Okay, you're right. And then maybe it should be phase 2 of the maternal care health, phase 3 of the maternal care health.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any objection to that? Senator Yamashita.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw my amendment.
All right, thank you. On any objection to the withdrawal of the Yamashita amendment? Senator Tom Adat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everyone should have a copy of the amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted to speak on the main amendment? Yeah, after Senator Tom. On the Nicholas amendment, as amended, did you wish to speak on this Nicholas amendment? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Speaker. I know there was a lot of amendments proffered to However, Mr. Chair or Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask the author if he may yield. Again, I know this was brought up by the previous speaker that we seem like we're earmarking these funds, and even though we're opening it up or limiting it by stating up to, I still think we still are earmarking these funds. And I point to the committee report too as well, and again provided by the hospital. And public law have already established the earlier amounts, I believe up to $895,000 for the A&E. That's what they were pointing to. And then they have several phases that they were addressing. And I think even the amounts here with $3 million to the GMHA nursery renovations is also off against the testimony that was provided by the hospital. So again, I understand the intent here, but I think when we're going a little too far against what was provided in testimony regarding these amounts, even if it was an increase to $7 million. They provided several testimony dealing with $4 million and $7 million. With regards to the $7 million, it does state that again, it does state several phases, phase 2 all the way up to phase 4, what they want to use these monies for. And again, even for the nursery renovations, they're actually stating around $4 million. So this amount even kind of, for the nursery renovations, actually restricts them from the amount they were proposing in their testimony. So if the author may yield, I'm not sure where he got these numbers or this estimated breakdown for these projects, because again, it's not jiving with the proposed plans.
Senator Snickless.
Sure, Mr. Speaker. First of all, there is no proposed plan. The architectural and engineering specifications need to be completed, and then we will know what the actual proposed plan is. What we are doing is we are seeking to pre-authorize the funding sources available for them to be able to move these projects forward. It was already clearly stated that the estimated amount for the labor and delivery ward was $4 million. The reason why the amendment was to bring it up to 7 was because the hospital has been now providing a figure of a total of 12 million. 1 million, or at least 895,000, was going to go to phase 1, the architectural and engineering specifications. 4 million was going to go to the labor and delivery ward. 3 million is going to go to the nursery, whatever the technical terms are for that. And the final 5 million, the final 4 million was going to come from the compact impact money that the governor was going to provide. So that's where these amounts break down into. The testimony that was provided during the public hearing was, again, all estimates based on what was in the very initial planning stages of this entire project, but we have no firm estimates. We have no architectural engineering specifications done. That was one of the things that Gita brought up as a reason why they don't want us to move the project forward. What we are wanting to do is to say, look, we're ready and we're comfortable to move this forward. We're comfortable to go from actually 4 million up to 7 million, and we're comfortable to apply the 4 million to phase 2 and the 3 million to phase 3. Now, if it turns out that the A&D comes back and it's going to cost way more than that, then we're going to have to cross that bridge when we get there. But what I actually do like is the idea of us setting an amount while the A&D is in process. So the hospital can sit down and say, look, we have 7 already for phase 2 and phase 3. Let's get the A&D done for phase 2, and let's not exceed 4 million. Let's try and come in under. And then, as they move on to phase 3, they can say, look, we have 3 million. Let's try and keep it under that 3 million. And so I think that actually by going with these amounts, we're going to be creating a more disciplined environment where the hospital is going to be able to say, this is our budget, let's try and fit within that amount. Now, for the hospital to say that, oh, we need more than 3 million, I think is a little premature because the architectural engineering specifications haven't been done yet. If their budget of 3 million that we're going to provide for them in this bill does turn out to be inadequate, they can come back to this body and we can amend the final version of this bill upwards, because again, this money will not be released until the A&D is complete, adopted by the board, and the RFP or the IFB is ready to go out. So again, we're just kind of creating a schedule of when money is going to go out and be released, but we're not setting any kind of limitations on what the project is going to entail. We're not telling them what they're going to build. We're just saying that this is the schedule that the money is going to be released at. And if the A&D comes in and it shows that it's higher, then that's a bridge that we'll cross when we get there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does that clarify it for you?
Yeah,
and I hope you have a copy of the board resolution, which...
Yes, I do. And,
okay,
and I'm actually that's what I'm referring to, Mr. Speaker. And again, if you look at it, it's, you know, it's off by $1 million. I know these are preliminary numbers, but again, this is where I'm saying that we're stretching it too far, that we're now seeming to earmark these funds regardless. Now, I understand at least a portion of the intent here, and I agree with the author, and I just think that we're going too far at earmarking how these funds will be spent. And again, when it's not jiving with the resolution, again, these are preliminary numbers, but I'm sure their estimates are a lot better than ours. I'm saying maybe it's possible if the author could review his amendment and maybe stop short of going down and allocating these funds or earmarking these funds. I'll take a short recess. real
Okay.
quick.
Do you have an objection to the amendment? To the Nicholas amendment? He doesn't want those I and double I, and so if he has an objection, then fine. He can say there's an objection, we can vote on it. If not, then let's move.
All right, I object to those two numbers.
All right, there's been an objection to the Nicholas amendment as proffered and as amended. All those in favor of the Nicholas amendment, please indicate by raising your right hand. You say you're objecting to the Nicholas amendment, correct? The way that it has the I and double I as being too restrictive. Okay, so I'm asking the rest of the members who is in support of the Nicholas amendment as amended and
Call the House, Mr. Speaker.
who's missing? I think we can vote and resolve this. All those in favor of this Nicholas amendment, please indicate by raising your right hand. This Nicholas amendment fails. Interesting. Okay, it's fine. Senator Tom Adda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everybody should have a copy of the amendment. Basically, the amendment that I'm proffering will kind of help to set some direction to the renovation work that needs to be undertaken at the hospital. Given the fact that the new situation now is that we got a new hospital, GRMC, we've gotten several new clinics that are opening up. I'm sure those have some kind of an impact on the hospital. And so the amendment that I'm proffering is to add a new subparagraph W10 on page 3, at the end of page 3, to read, and I'm going to make some corrections here on line 4. The GMH Board of Trustees shall cause an update of its facilities master plan that will guide the capital improvement of the Guam Memorial Hospital. The trustees shall allocate sufficient funds from the amount obtained from the line of credit, revolving fund, and/or direct loan authorized by this section. And then I need to add in there, for the purpose of completing a master plan update, period. Review and approval of the completed master plan update shall be in accordance with the administrative adjudication law. Said master plan update shall be completed within 180 days from the date of enactment of this statute.
On the Tom Adda amendment.
Correct. So, as whoever is doing the master plan has got to take a look at the fact that you now have these new clinics being built, the one there in Sinahanya, the one in Mangilao, you have international health physicians, you got the new GRMC. Is this going to basically free up services that at one time used to be done only at GMH, that maybe that will free up room. So basically you need to take a look at this facility we call GMH and see how it needs to be reconfigured to be more consistent with the new environment within which it is a part of. What would never happen?
On the Adda amendment, any senator wish to be heard on the Adda amendment? Senator Speaker Wampat, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to understand this probably more fully. And the question I have, though, to make sure first before I start to speak on it, is that whether the amount money up to 7 million that's being borrowed, are we looking at using those monies then for to do a master plan? That's my first question.
Senator Tamata, do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. So, so they're gonna go out and borrow up to $7 million, and out of that, I mean, we're not talking about $5 million to do a master plan update. I don't think it's going to take that kind of fund. So, basically, carving out some of that $7 million to complete a master plan, and so, go ahead and continue with the renovation of the maternity ward. But in the meantime, we also need, at the same time, we need to also be doing a master plan update so that when we finish with the renovation of that unit, we kind of now have a better idea, or at least the hospital would have a better idea of where the next critical area is that needs to be updated.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, you
Yes,
still have the
okay.
floor.
And I understand that, and I support the concept, of course, of yes, really having a master plan. I think it's a great idea because we do need to know exactly what we need to do with the hospital in light of all these other health facilities that are being built on island. The concern I have, of course, is now the funding source in terms to do the facilities, and I think that maybe what we could do, because I don't think they have used the entire amount, the $900,000 they said when they're doing the A&E. I'm not an engineer, I don't know, and maybe if he can help me with that I would prefer that part of that master plan, which is to do the A&E for the maternal health care facility, if the monies can come from that to do the master plan, therefore not going into and touching the 7 million that we want to actually be for the renovation.
If memory serves me right, at the hearing, they announced that the RFP had already gone out. They've received the bids, and they were reviewing it. They should be announcing forthwith who received that bid, and so we have no idea how much money is left in that.
Well, see, you're right, and that's my concern too, and I would like it that if they didn't use that amount, that it could be used for a master plan, facilities master plan, rather than taking it out of the 7 million.
Well, A&Es are usually 15% of the overall budget. So the 900 would be close to the 15% for a $7 million project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other senator wish to speak on the ADA amendment? Any objections to the ADA amendment? There being none. Any other, back on the main motion? Senator Siniclas.
Mr. Speaker, I may have another amendment to proffer, but at this time I'd like to probably motion that we go into recess until that amendment is complete.
All right, it's 12:10. 2 o'clock, we'll resume the discussion on this bill.